When you reflect on the past 6 years, what are you most proud of?
I think I'm most proud of taking them and their story and their history beyond Canada. I'm most interested and really happy that we've been able to connect with other similar communities around the world, so they don't feel alone.
Welcome to another episode of Dustin's Kaleidoscope. Today, I'm excited to sit down with Juanita Peters, the Executive Director of the Africville Museum. She will share the important history of Africville, a once thriving Black community in Nova Scotia, Canada, and how it reflects a larger narrative of resilience and community strength. We did encounter a few audio issues during the recording, but I hope you still enjoy this fascinating and important discussion. Thank you so much, Ms. Peters, for being here on Dustin's Kaleidoscope and telling us a little bit more about Africville. So as we get started, can you give us a little bit more of the history of Africville and its importance?
Yeah, so let me start with the importance of Africans to Canada and to Nova Scotia, because Africans have been in the province of Nova Scotia since the 1600s, which a lot of people don't realize. Black life in Canada began in Nova Scotia, with the largest migrations coming after the American Revolution and the War of 1812. As a matter of fact, the province of Nova Scotia during that period of time had the only colony of free Blacks outside of the continent.
Wow.
You got that?
Wow.
The only colony that would have been in Bridgetown, Shelburne area. And so the people of Africville had already been in this province for a very long time before they settled on these grounds on the Bedford Basin. They were on these grounds for about a little over 120, 150 years. Great, sort of just at the outskirts of the community, but part of Halifax. They built their houses, they built their stores, they created everything that creates a community: school, church, meeting places, living on the water, fishing, swimming, and just sort of building this enclave that became very self-sustainable. And then over time, of course, the city introduced many things that nobody would want in their community. They were not given the things that taxpayers normally get, like, road work, garbage cleaning up, fire, ambulance. There's so many stories of how the people of Africville persevered regardless of these things. And how they continue to grow and build their community. And at the end of days, basically the city, because they were neglecting the community, labeled it as a slum and moved people out of the community and dispersed them. So they were not moved as a community, they were dispersed and they had to go wherever they could find places to go. And that's the real crime of the story of Africville. And even more than that, it's how the people of Africa were treated the 100+ years that they were here on this land.
And so that's so sad to hear, because it sounds like they were a very thriving community, and little bit by little bit, the things that we take for granted, like the trash removal and just some of the other things, were gradually removed and eliminated from them. When did this start, and why did that happen?
So let me say that the things were never removed. They were never here.
Oh.
They were never, ever given those things. They were taxpayers who were never, ever given those things. And we hear stories like, when we say they had no water, people think, oh yeah, well, we have a lot of communities that have wells. But what you have to understand is not only did they not have water, the very few wells that they had were most likely contaminated. And this was said by the city of Halifax. The city of Halifax put signage up letting people know that this water could be contaminated because of all the things that they had put in the area. So the infectious disease hospital and all those contaminants from the infectious disease hospital came down here into the open dump or into the soil. all the PCPs from industry, you name it, it wound up in Africville, not by their choice. The other thing, when we think about not having water, there's a story that one of our former residents tells that's really quite alarming. And when they're talking about not having fire service, and the houses were made of wood, and she talks about being a little girl and watching a house that is on fire with her family. The people, she said, it's like watching a Western movie. You know how they take the water and try to pass the pails down?
Yes.
Pass the water on
Yes.
the structure. But there weren't enough wells and not enough people. They were too far apart. And that fire, she watched 3 little girls perish in that fire. And when you think about that and the after effects of a human being to have watched that and to know that your life could be in peril someday and people would not be able to help. So these are the long and short term, tragedies of Africville.
That's really just so disappointing to hear that they were not given the support as taxpayers, like the basic support you would expect. That's just so disappointing and I guess in a sense enraging as well, I'm sure, for the residents there. So this all happened, you said, over the course of 100 years. I know now that Africville, there are no buildings there except for the church. Not all of the buildings burned down, obviously. So can you explain what happened?
So the buildings did not burn down. The city tore the buildings down. So they, over a period of time, started like in the 50s, where the conversation of destroying Africville started. And throughout the 60s, section by section, the city started the process of getting people off the land. So basically, the land would have been taken by the city anyway. So they offered people who owned houses. So remember, like every other community, some people own houses, some people are renters. So that you start with the people who own property and say, either sell up to us or this land is going to be expropriated anyway. So when those people sell, they're selling the homes that they live in and they can go out and buy other houses. But they're also sometimes selling other houses that they have renters in. And so the renters don't have a choice to leave, just like we would today if you lived in a rental unit. And it went like that. It was like over time, sections were approached and you'd wake up and find that your neighbor wasn't there anymore. But they say divide and conquer, right? So over time, every house was gone. There is a house that was traditionally an Africville house that still exists at the bottom of the road. If you go around the turn, it is occupied by a descendant. There's another house that was an original Africville house that was moved out in the 50s. And that house, there was another encroachment that happened in Africville in the 50s with the expansion of the infectious disease hospital. And that family decided to move their house out of Africville, and it sits at 10 Settlement Lane in Lower Sackville. So that house is still intact. It's not occupied. But that is an original Africville house as well.
Wow. So what was the reason for them, even though did they live in it after they moved the home?
Oh, yes. They lived in it for many years and raised their family. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm by the looks of the house, I'm trying to remember if the house has only been empty for the last 20 years or less, because the family grew up and moved out. It's still owned by the family. But they went off, the younger ones, and worked elsewhere in Ontario and Vancouver and whatever. So that house still stands, but there's nobody living in it today. It's not still owned by that family.
So is it a part of Africville, though, even if it's informally? Like, do you still consider it as part of Africville?
No, because it's in Lower Sackville, which is about 15 minutes away.
Oh, got it. Okay. And it sounds like the reason, because I'm trying to figure out, like, what is the reason for relocating and disrupting this community? But it sounds like there was an expansion made of the infectious disease hospital. Is that why? Or were there other reasons behind trying to get rid of all the people in Africville?
Yeah, so all those things are gone. The infectious disease hospital no longer exists there. all those things are gone. The reason why they said they wanted to get rid of Africville, number one, it was labeled as they labeled it as a slum and an eyesore. And then they used the excuse of building the new McDonald Bridge as the reason the new McKay Bridge, the new bridge, as the reason for needing the property and for moving the people out. However, the real rub is that after that bridge was built, all Africville lands became an open park. It became a dog park where people could come and let their dogs run. The park area above us was an area where there were Africville houses, and that still is an open park. There's nothing else there. So, the idea of disrupting the community instead of giving them the supports and services that all other people received was really and still is quite insulting.
Especially to hand it over to a dog park. Like that seems pretty egregious to me, to relocate all those people and remove them. I know that you are going through efforts to revitalize and get people to know more about the history, because I actually just happened to find out about the community because a friend of mine just said casually, "Oh, I'm going to be going to Halifax and I'll be going to this place called Africville." And I'm like, "Tell me more. I've never heard of anything like that up in Canada." So it was interesting to me. There must be descendants, even if they're not living in that area. What do they think about what you're doing, and how responsive have they been to the rebuilding of Africville?
We are so blessed because there are lots of descendants, and we actually rely on the elders. The elders are in here all the time, and we're constantly communicating with the elders. We have a number of descendants. So let me just say the children of Africville are in their 70s and 80s today.
Okay.
And so some of them may have left when they were 6, 7, 8 years old. Most of the ones that we talked to were teenagers when they left. And so they have some really solid memories of what life was like growing up here. And so we try to say, as a museum, we have a very specific mandate. So we try to, within the framework of museum work, we try to look at what are the things that were most important to the people of Africville. What do they want people to know about what life was like, what happened to them, and what they'd like to see in the future. And so let me say this, I'm in the process right now of creating a senior program, which I'm so excited about because unlike most museums, you're talking about things that have long past, and they are really artifacts. My artifacts are living. We have a living history here. And so we've created a situation where we offer the opportunity for our guests to talk to one or two elders from the community. And so we pre-book people. We have a group of about 7 or 8 that we use quite often. And so I decided about 7 months ago that it would be really great to be able to pay our elders to be on site all the time.
Right.
Okay, so we are building a program that will allow us to pay 1 or 2 seniors to be in here all the time. And so it means something very different when I greet people, although I think, I love telling the story. But when you have the real people in front of you, you have to see the faces of people when they come in and how they share even more openly about their own communities or their own stories. And it's so much fun. It's challenging because of, again, we need supports. We don't get any federal funding. And so, but we make, again, in the Africville spirit, we make a lot out of nothing.
And you know what? That's what I really, when I was looking at your website and all the different things that you have done, I'm like, this is exactly what what stood out to me is doing the best with what you have. I think it's phenomenal that you are having the elders actually there to greet people and answer questions. I have been to so many national parks and to state parks where they will have a interpreter or they'll have a reenactment actor. And, it's very nice. But to actually have that resource of the actual people who live there who can tell you firsthand, that is so wonderful. I don't know if you're recording the people who are interviewed. I don't know if you're documenting it with a written word, but to have that firsthand knowledge is incredible. It's truly incredible. Now that you have this program in place, what has been the response?
Hey, it's Dustin. I hope you're enjoying my discussion with Juanita Peters. If you are, make sure to subscribe to the podcast, rate us, and share it with someone who would love learning more about Africville's inspiring story. Your support means a lot. Now back to the conversation.
How do people feel when they enter the museum and they're able to actually talk to descendants who have lived and who have, in some instances, I assume, have grown up in Africville?
Yeah, I wish you could see the faces of people when we tell them, here's the little girl you're seeing on the Africville stamp, right? I think that, Bernice is probably about 10 in that photo, and here she is today. They're so excited. And also, one of the things you might, be familiar with is the way our elders treated people. When people came to your house for dinner, when they came after church, there was a ceremony, and the way they made you feel special. That is part of what these ladies and guys do. They make everybody just feel like they're the only ones in the room, and they're talking and communicating with them and sharing, and it's really quite special. If you ever get a chance to come to one of the seniors' teas that they put on or our Christmas celebration, you'll see it. It's like being in your own home.
Wow.
It's quite extraordinary.
That is just so amazing that you have the people who are still around to do this, and also that there are so many people interested. And I can only imagine, I see how people act when I go to places where they have reenactment actors, and people are really excited, even though those are not the real people. So I can imagine being in a room with the actual people who were part of this community and to get their perspective on what has happened. So now that you have this museum, and I know that the first building that you have constructed is the church. It's not the actual church, but it's a building that looks like the original church. Is that correct?
So the museum is a replica. It is a replica of the last church to exist in Africville. And I want to say, had you come 3 years ago, just on that personal note, I could say to you, you see the guy mowing the lawn, the guy who is the caretaker of this building and the outdoors. He is this only son of the last man to leave Africville. And so you put the land in their hands and have them teach people, how to, he's 82 now. And the person who has taken over from him claims to be the last baby born in Africa. It just feels so good to see them on the land, doing things on the land. And they take such pride in it. And they also take much offense, when people don't treat it properly. But all these things are all part and parcel, right?
Right.
You were asked me earlier if we record, the conversations, and the answer is no, because they happen every single day. But what does happen is because they're here so much, there are things that come out that they haven't even forgotten about. So let me say this: when people interview them, and they've been interviewed to death with the same questions over and over and over. But all of a sudden, they're sitting in a room together. And here, I was driving two of the women home last year, and I heard one of the women says, Bernice, do you remember when the SPCA used to come and dump the dead dogs in Africa? That's what I said. What? And she said, yeah, we were walking to school one day and we saw them dumping the dead dogs. And she said, later, these great big green tomatoes came up on the land and we knew we couldn't eat them because that's what the fertilizer was.
Oh, okay.
Right? So things like that pop up. One day, Nelson was telling me a story about something his father did, and the way he looked when he was talking about his father, I thought, I decided to create these Mother's Day, Father's Day digital postcards. And I brought in a number of elders and just set them in front of a camera and said, tell me what one of your fondest stories about your mother or your father is. And then I took them to our partner at the National College of Art and Design and asked them if they would put them in an animated card form and animate little pieces of them. We did 12 of those. They are absolutely beautiful. We gave them to the local network to air a week before Mother's Day and a week before Father's Day. And they are so precious, so precious.
That sounds like such a beautiful idea and such a beautiful way to commemorate their moms. That sounds really beautiful. So now that your museum is gaining more traction outside of the area, what has been the response from people outside of Africville to what you're doing?
So we're not an island. We're part of the mainland. We're part of Nova Scotia, part of Halifax. And we are actually internationally known. So we have partners across Canada and throughout the U.S. We just came back from the Smithsonian. And we are trying to keep up, really, just in terms of the catalog of things that people are requesting of us. We're very small. We're only now newly a staff of full-time 3. But we do have, again, a collection of elders, which we bring in and rely on as well. So it's about, how do we continue to grow? What are the stories that are most important? And how do we show those in a way that make us sustainable? So when is at the part of the promise, so this church, this museum comes out of the 2010 apology from then Mayor Peter Kelly. And I always say he was one of the bravest men alive because many people had an opportunity to apologize to the people of Africville before him, and they didn't. In his apology, he gave 2.5 acres of original Africville land to the Africville Heritage Trust, which we manage, and monies to build this church. There was also a promise of an interpretive center. So that's where we are now. We're looking at building that interpretive center. What could it be? What needs to be in there? How do we make it in a way that it's sustainable? Who would be our partners? There is so much fun in thinking about it, but the hard work is about to begin.
So what is your vision for the interpretive center?
Well, we've done a number of consultations with former residents, and we've also went back because there was conversations about the interpretive center almost 20 years ago. And so we went back and we looked at those documents because most of those people have passed on, but we wanted to see what were the things that were important to those folks. What were the things that they talked about? They talked about having a meeting space inside that interpretive center. They talked about that meeting space being able to also service as a place where people could have weddings or big events that you could rent it out. They talked about the different stories that could be told. In our museum, we have one exhibit that has been here since the museum opened. And the way this museum is designed, that is what it is. But we want to tell more stories. We want to actually have visiting curators as well, or visiting exhibits that come in and could be here for a year, just like other museums. We want to do programming in a way that other people can participate. Because there's so many great pieces. The other thing I want to say is, over the years, people always talk about life on the water. And they talk about how they would fish here on the water. People still do today. How they would boat. When I first came here as the executive director, the then chair would call me and say, Jay, do you have a pail? And I'd say, maybe. And I'd find something, and he'd pretty load up mackerel and dump it in the can. It's like, how many jobs get that kind of service, right?
Wow.
And so over these years, yeah. And also I learned 4.5 years ago that one of the major diving companies was started by a man from Africville.
Really?
Was a diver, and many people to dive. In fact, he even taught one of our past ministers of African Nova Scotian affairs to dive. I didn't know. Divers come here all the time. Scientists come here all the time because they say the waters off Africville are very unique. And I say, how? They say the waters remain 2 to 3 degrees warmer than most ocean spaces. And so what that means is different wildlife comes here, or marine life that comes nowhere else. I'm going to show you something, and I'm going to describe it to your...
Oh, sure.
Am I going to? Yes, I am. So this is one of the gifts that the science gave us. Can you see this?
Lift it up a little bit more. Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, that's really nice.
This was found off the shore of Africville. It's called a water butterfly. It originates in China.
Really?
And so they're constantly flying. For people who are listening and cannot see, it is a thinly skinned, light blue object that looks. It looks a little like a butterfly because it has a long tail and 2 wings. Inside, you can see the organs, which are lit up right now to look orange and red. So you see it in the head, in the chest, and what might be sort of the bottom of the organism before you get to the tail. The tail has a very bright red look, and it looks almost translucent, like you can see right through it. In actuality, this organism would probably, they say, be only about 2 centimeters, and so they blown it up for this picture.
That's beautiful.
Find things like this here all the time. And so we started talking about the importance of the water and how the water served us prior to coming to the Americas,
right,
for cooking and cleaning and nourishment, and then how the water changed our trajectory and brought us to a place that was unkind to us, and
right,
how people feared water, because people died on those boats. And when they got here, they used the water as sustainability. So we said, let's take that story and amplify it even more. So we are lemonade makers. About 6 years ago, the city began dumping garbage again off Africville. It created a 17-acre landmass. And instead of crying about it, we said, let's build the Africville Marina. So that marina becomes a sustainability piece for the museum and the Interpretive Center. We are also looking at building a school, a sailing school. So African Nova Scotians and people who are from underserviced communities can learn how to sail and learn to do these jobs that can take them around the world. When we suggested this, the partnerships that came to us and said, we want to be a part of this, were just extraordinary. So, you know what? We have to delight in thinking about ways of making something bad, something good for us, and sort of writing your own future. And that's where we're at right now.
It sounds like Africville is not just a community that's on land, but it's also, like you said, it's based off of the water, whether you want to refer to how people came to Africville, but how you're still thriving on water and on land, and how you made lemonade out of lemons by having the dump site now be a harbor, or you're making it into a harbor in other parts of Africville. So now that you've been the director for 6 years and you've seen the improvements and you've seen the people come and you've seen them celebrate the community as it has been, and you also see the people who are the elders who are explaining what Africville is, when you reflect on the past 6 years, what are you most proud of?
I think I'm most proud of taking them and their story and their history beyond Canada. I'm most interested and really happy that we've been able to connect with other similarly communities around the world, so they don't feel alone, in that experience. And we keep learning from each other. Most recently, a year ago, we met people from Africa Town. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that story or not, in Mobile, Alabama.
Oh, yes, yes.
So when I met the people of Africa Town and introduced them to the people of Africville, we made a pact that we wouldn't forget each other and that we continue to communicate with each other. Most recently, this year, we brought Dr. Kern Jackson, who's the producer of Descendant, the film on Netflix, that tells the story of the people of Africa Town. We brought him here. We engaged in conversations with academics first, then community. We talked about our story, and then at nighttime, we shared their story with Nova Scotians. It was a fantastic night. It was full of learning and full of understanding, most importantly. I think we can learn a lot about each other, and then we have to understand what we can do now in this moment in time. And we always want, I lay in bed always on Christmas week, and I always think about, what did we get to do this year that was worth it? We all only have so much time in our lifetime. What did we do this year that was worth it? And I sleep so soundly because we are very challenged because we are so small and because we have no funds. But we have been able to make a way out of no way with partnering with like-minded people. And all of our partners are all partners that I've had for 4 or 5 years, and are always willing to jump in on the next project. So that's always rewarding.
Like you said, during Christmas week, you're able to sleep soundly because you feel like you've accomplished so many things with so few people. With organizations like yours, that always seems to be the truth, that there are fewer resources than needed, but then you give them more than what they expect, even with the few resources. Looking forward, what would you like to do in the next 6 years? What would you like to accomplish?
I must see the marina with the boats in the water. I must see the interpretive center open those doors, and open those doors knowing that they are secure, that they have a great sustainable financial, a platform. Those are the two things that, if that's done, I will feel absolutely thrilled.
That's wonderful. I'm sure you're going to do it, considering all the things that you have already done with Africville. So that should be, on the next 6 years, that should be pretty easily done. Before we close up, is there anything else that you want people to know about Africville or the community, anything at all?
I want people to know that the story of Africville is unique in Canada, but it's not unique around the world. The things that the people of Africville face, we see more and more how that plays out around the world. Environmental racism, putting things in the backyards and beside houses that put people in danger, both mentally and physically. And so we have to band together. We have to talk to each other and support each other through these things and look at what are the things that we can take away, that we can change in our lifetime.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sitting down and speaking with me today. And this has been a wonderful conversation. I know so many people will appreciate everything that you're doing for Africville, but the broader thing is that you are helping our communities in general understand where we have come from and where we plan to go. So I appreciate it so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning into my conversation with Juanita Peters about the legacy of Africville. I hope you have gained a new perspective on its history and the ongoing efforts to preserve its memory. Don't forget to subscribe, rate the show, and share this episode with your friends. And as always, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to Dustin's Kaleidoscope. Until next time, bye.